Carson Wentz has had his moments in the NFL. He was once an MVP candidate and helped lead the Eagles to a Super Bowl. Of course, his contributions came in the regular season before he went down with a torn ACL. Injuries and disappointment. The story of Carson Wentz's career. Things didn't work out in Indianapolis, and coming into 2020, he likely only has one more chance to prove he can be a starting quarterback, and it'll come in Washington. Of course, Carson Wentz's career hasn't gone as well as expected. He was supposed to be the savior for the Eagles, and honestly, he kind of was. I'm sure Philadelphia wouldn't change a damn thing looking back. Like, when you win a Super Bowl, you don't really care what you had to do to get there. Turns out neither are exactly stars, but hey, they're both still starting in the NFL 6 years later. He definitely had his struggles as a rookie. The Eagles were a pretty good team, especially on defense, trying to fill that quarterback hole, and Wentz just wasn't that guy in year one. He had 18 total touchdowns, and it came with 14 interceptions and 14 fumbles. Probably not ideal, but nobody cares, because in 2017, he was a different dude. He passed for about 3,300 yards and 33 touchdowns to only 7 interceptions. Wentz was being talked about as a potential MVP, and the Eagles were 11-2. But then, tragedy struck. In week 14, Wentz suffered a torn ACL. The rest of the story is a good one though, just not for Wentz. Nick Foles took over and led Philadelphia to its first ever Super Bowl victory. Wentz had to sit on the sideline and eventually walk into a building every day with a statue of his backup at the entrance. Wentz got his starting job back, but then was shut down for a year with a back injury. Then, Foles took over again and led the Eagles to a playoff game win. Wentz did get the Eagles back to the playoffs in 2019, but suffered a concussion early in the wild card. Injuries. But we'll get back to that. In 2020, Philadelphia sucked, and so did Wentz. And eventually, he got benched for Jalen Hurts, and for good reason. Wentz only played 12 games, but led the league in 3 categories: interceptions, turnovers, and sacks taken. The messy year led him to being traded away to the Colts in exchange for first and third round picks. Obviously, after everything that went down in Philadelphia and how it all unraveled, the Colts were this new scenery second chance for Wentz, one that he really needed to make good on. And statistically, he kind of did. Wentz was reunited with Frank Reich, the Colts head coach, and Wentz's old OC in Philly, and the two worked well together again. He got off to a rough start in Indy, needing foot surgery in the offseason, but he ended up playing in every single game and passed for over 3,500 yards with 27 touchdowns and only 7 interceptions. Statistically, he was good, but with how everything ended last season, it left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. Indy narrowly lost to the Raiders in week 17, and it set up a win and you're in scenario for week 18. All the Colts had to do was beat the depressing back-to-back worst team in football, Jaguars. And they came out and looked awful. Wentz and really everyone just looked sluggish and didn't play well. It was a horrendous way to end a year that at times showed promise. And since Wentz left Indy, it only looks worse. The Colts were obviously done with Carson Wentz after a single season and wanted a fresh start. The Commanders reportedly called every single team in the league to get a gauge on which quarterbacks were available. Of course, there was the hope that Washington could luck into one of the top guys like Russell Wilson or Deshaun Watson, but come on, nobody that is truly elite is going to choose to go to Washington, an organization with immense dysfunction through and through. The Commanders realized that Wentz was going to be their best chance at an upgrade. And yes, they absolutely had to upgrade from Taylor Heineke. Washington sent a 2022 second and third round pick and a conditional 2023 third round pick in exchange for Wentz. Of course, the Colts turned around and traded for Matt Ryan. And maybe it's just the inner Commanders fan in me, but it's just so frustrating that Indy only had to give up a single third round pick. Looking back, Washington probably jumped the gun too early on trading for Wentz, because right after, Ryan and Baker Mayfield became available for trade. It's no secret that the Commanders are a mess. More off the field than on, but the point still stands. I think Washington actually has a lot of faith in Wentz, probably because he torched them twice a year when he was in Philly. At the very least, Wentz is going to have much better weapons on the outside side than he did in Indy. I personally like Michael Pittman, but Wentz didn't really have much more outside of him. Plus, Pittman isn't better than Terry McLaurin. Curtis Samuel is coming back, and maybe he'll be good. I mean, who really knows? But Washington did go out and draft Dotson out of Penn State in the first round. Of course, Wentz can't result to just handing it off to Jonathan Taylor anymore, but Antonio Gibson is a solid back. You might be surprised to hear this, or you actually paid attention, but the Colts' offensive line wasn't really very good last year. I think they're going to bounce back, but after injuries and even when guys got back, they just weren't that good. PFF graded the Colts out as the third worst pass blocking unit in football. Yes, they were good in the run game for Taylor, but they didn't really help Wentz out very much. Even Quentin Nelson, who, let's not kid ourselves, is the best lineman in the league when healthy, had a down year. Washington, even with injuries, still had a good line, considered the 6th best in the league. Honestly, I don't really know how to explain that. It was a makeshift, randomly put together line, but hey, it worked, so I'm not gonna complain. One of the newest wrinkles in the confusion of the Commanders' quarterback room is Sam Howell. You already have Taylor Heineke, who started almost all season in 2021 and is still probably going to be on the roster. He already knows the playbook and Ron Rivera trusts him, so I don't know why you wouldn't keep him. But we already know what Heineke is. The interesting guy on the block is Howell. At the draft, despite already trading for Wentz, the Commanders decided to take a young quarterback, Howell, in the 5th round. I will say, I don't think Washington was really looking for a quarterback going into the draft, but once Howell dropped all the way to the 5th, Washington probably felt like they had to take a shot on the youngster. I like Howell a lot. I think he has a realistic shot to develop into an NFL starting quarterback, but that's going to take some time. A lot of time. I don't think he's going to see playtime this season, and maybe not even next season. I have a feeling he'll be 3rd on the depth chart behind Heineke and, of course, Wentz. I think one of the best ways to see how a team feels about a player is by looking at their contract. So, what does Carson Wentz's contract tell us? Well, in fairness, the contract is one that the Eagles gave him that was passed on to the Colts and then the Commanders. But that doesn't change the fact that Wentz is a dead man walking. At a glance, his contract has 2 years left on it, but it has a potential out after this season, meaning that Washington can drop him after this year and not owe a penny. In 2022, he'll make $28 million, and that's worth the money to see if you can turn a once good quarterback back into his former self. And if it doesn't work, just cut him loose. Carson Wentz's career comes down to this season. He's had his opportunities to prove that he can be a starting quarterback, and he hasn't made the most of them. Early in his career in Philadelphia, he showed so much promise, but everything has fallen apart since. I think injuries are a lot to blame. When healthy, he looked like a different player, but you can't just stop being injury prone. Somehow, Wentz needs to stay on the field and play well. If not, we may never see Carson Wentz starting consistently in the pros ever again.